stood my ground with a neighbor who kept demanding we stop parking legally on the street, and now she knows my child's identity at the nursery. My partner and I'm 36, she's 35, recently made the big leap from the city to a quiet little village, all in hopes of finding better schools for our 2-year-old. As is always the case with moving house, our to-do list is a mile long, and we've been slowly checking off all the urgent repairs. One of the more maddening problems has been our electric gates, which have a habit of suddenly failing and locking us in, cars trapped on the driveway and all. We've even had to take taxis to get our little one to nursery because the gates refuse to budge, both manual and automatic overrides broken. 2 companies confirmed the ugly truth: not only is the system faulty, but it's a major job to fix or replace. So, while the gates work sometimes, they can't be trusted, and the only practical solution is to park our family car on the street where it's always accessible. About a week ago, my partner headed out and found a soggy note plastered to the windscreen. It had rained, so any writing was lost in the blur. I felt pretty sure it was about the car being on the road, so I texted the neighbors whose numbers I already had, on the one side of us and across the street, just to check in. I let them know we'd found a note and, if it was from them, we were open to talking about it. Every single one of them replied and reassured me it wasn't them, and that there were 0 issues with our parking. Later, my partner bumped into John, the neighbor just down the way, and he, too, said there was no issue. So imagine my surprise when, a couple days later, another note turned up: to the owner of this car, can you please stop parking outside our wall? This time it was signed, with the house name, John's house, the very one who said he had no problem with it. Strange, but I tried to take it in stride. Just for context, I'd absolutely parked directly in front of our house, but the road is narrow and we're on a corner coming off a busy street. Anyone turning in is suddenly confronted with a dark, barely visible car, especially given the lousy street lighting. So instead we park about 30 feet away, beneath a street lamp, where it's much safer for everyone. The next day, another note: I have told you already to stop parking in front of our wall. By now this was becoming a real issue, so my partner and I decided to write back. We introduced ourselves, confirmed the car was ours, and explained our safety concerns with parking directly outside our home. When my partner went to deliver the note, John's wife opened the door before she could even knock. She immediately adopted an aggressive tone. "You will not park there again. I will not allow it. I don't want to see your car there after tonight." She gave no real reason, just that she didn't like it and thought it made the street look messy. When my partner tried to walk away and mentioned she wanted to talk to me about it too, the woman followed her down our driveway, pushing the issue and demanding to know where we'd park in future. Here's the part that made my stomach drop. During that conversation, when my partner brought up safety, the woman mentioned she works at the local nursery, so she knows all about safety. My partner, caught off guard, said that our child goes to that very nursery. That's when the realization hit hard. Now this frustrated neighbor knows our child could be under her supervision. She doesn't know their name or appearance yet, but she knows our address, and I'm sure she could find all our information in the nursery's system if she wanted to. The very next morning, another note: as agreed, stop parking your car in front of our wall. Of course, no such agreement had been made. Now, because of the potential nursery connection, I wanted to dial things down, not escalate them. I bought a box of chocolates and sat down to write as diplomatic a note as possible. We wanted to follow up regarding your concerns about where we've been parking. Please know that it has never been our intention to cause any upset or inconvenience. We have been made aware by other road users that the combination of the narrow road, the junction, and the limited lighting can make parking directly outside our house unsafe. For this reason, the spot beneath the street lamp has proven the safest, in terms of visibility and hazard avoidance for everyone who drives through. As this is a public road, we understand no one can reserve spaces or dictate who parks where. Our other neighbors have told us directly that parking there is completely reasonable. With this in mind, we do intend to continue using the spot. If you're planning any gardening work, please just let us know and we'll happily move the car further down the street for the day. We hope this helps clarify our reasoning and our consideration for all the residents and road users. My partner delivered the note, with chocolates, while I was out picking up our kid. By the time I got home, I could hear voices raised. The neighbor was on our porch, berating my partner. I walked up, handed off our child to their mom, and joined the conversation. She already knew what our little one looked like. She practically shoved the chocolates and note back, making it clear she wouldn't accept them, and started accusing us of disrespect and rudeness. She repeated that there was no actual problem with access or safety, just that she didn't like how the car looked parked under her wall. She even told me we should park in front of someone else's house, and insulted my partner, saying I needed to have a word because she doesn't listen. I stayed calm, listened, and politely responded. I told her I'd consider her opinion, and finally she left. We haven't moved the car. I'm honestly just frustrated and annoyed now. Our parking is legal, safe, and in my mind, totally reasonable. But she's painted us as rude troublemakers, neighbors who don't fit in. Update 1. As has become almost routine, I found another note on the car this morning, another demand to move it ASAP. I added it to the growing pile in the kitchen, keeping every single note in case I ever need to refer back to these encounters. Fed up and a bit anxious, I decided to contact the local non-urgent police line to get some official advice on the situation. They checked my address and confirmed that I'm absolutely within my rights to park exactly where I am. Apparently, angry notes and an aggressive tone don't cross the legal threshold for threats, only direct threats of violence or explicit property damage would count. Still, if the notes ever became actually threatening, they told me to call them back immediately. They did mention if this woman kept coming to my door over and over, it could potentially become a stalking issue, though they admitted that sounded a bit extreme at this point. Throughout the day, ideas on how to handle this rattled around in my mind. One suggestion I seriously considered was disconnecting the power to our gates and leaving them open, making it impossible for her to complain about where I park. The catch was, I suspected it might invalidate my car or house insurance, so I started planning to call my insurer before making that decision. Until the afternoon threw yet another wrench in the works. The intercom suddenly buzzed. Her voice, again. It's me again. Your car is still there, you have to move it now. I told her I was busy, but she just would not let it go, insisting I come outside and talk. Honestly, with the rain pouring down, I should have ignored her, but instead, I bundled up and stepped outside to face her. She immediately launched into her same old tirade, so I calmly explained all the steps we'd taken, the police advice, our rights, everything. She just glared at me. I know the police say it's fine, but it's not fine with me. I swear, in that moment, I almost gave up, almost agreed to move my car just to make this entire debacle end, because she seemed so utterly unreasonable. But then she raised the stakes. If you don't move it right now, I'll move my own cars out of my garage and block yours in. One in front, one behind. You won't be able to use it at all. I struggled not to burst out laughing. Was she serious? How could blocking me and possibly solve her complaint about where I was parking? It was such a spectacularly petty thing to threaten. I just told her okay, turned on my heel, and went back inside. Enough really was enough. Update 2. About an hour after I'd told her okay and shut the door, I heard engines rumbling and doors slamming and looked at the camera feed. Her headlights swung across our front garden like we were on a stage. She and John were doing a slow-motion shuffle with both their cars, nose to tail, inching them up so tight to ours that even a bicycle would have had to hold its breath to squeeze past. It was petty theater played at 2 miles an hour in the drizzle. I stood there in the hall with my coat still damp on the hook and dialed 101 again. They logged it as obstruction and said they'd send someone because it was active and the cars were placed to restrict use, not just park badly. A PC and a PCSO were on our step 20 minutes later. Polite, tired looking, the sort of faces you know have had a long shift of people saying it's the principal. They asked for details, we pointed at the cars, and while the PCSO took photos, the officer went to knock on their door. Through the porch glass I could see her gesturing, palms up, the same routine about my wall and our frontage and what it looks like, and then the audible click into the policeman voice. It's a public highway, ma'am. You can't obstruct access as a way to resolve a dispute. She tried to say we could still go, we just had to angle out carefully, and to demonstrate she came down and jammed herself between the bumpers with her phone light, like she was refereeing parking Tetris. The PC took her details, repeated himself, and asked her to move both cars. She did, gritted teeth all the way, and the officer circled back to me to say to keep hold of the footage and notes and that a pattern would matter if this continued. He gave me an incident number. She stood on her step and watched it being written down and looked like she'd swallowed a lemon whole. I slept flat out for the first time in days and woke up to the kind of British sunshine that's just rain that forgot to fall sideways. I decided the night before to put something in writing to the nursery so there was a record. I sent an email first thing, factual and calm, laying out that a neighbor had identified herself as working there and had referenced safety in a way that made us uncomfortable. I asked, very specifically, that our child's data access be restricted to core staff and that this person not be placed with them. Within an hour the manager phoned me. Her voice swung straight into reassuring professional, and she told me they took safeguarding and data protection extremely seriously. She said their system logs access, that my child's file hadn't been viewed outside of normal notes by key staff, and that, effective immediately, the neighbor wouldn't be on our child's room rota or have reason to be near them. She couldn't get into HR specifics, but she made it clear they'd be following their process. I put the phone down and felt 2 weights at once, relief and the awful knowledge that a quiet email would never stay quiet once it reached our neighbor. 10 minutes later the quiet went out with it. The space under the lamp had sprouted a cone and 2 terracotta planters, the big ones that look like they were nicked off a hotel terrace, plunked exactly where cars fit. I stood in the road in my slippers like an idiot, rain speckling, and just moved them. Cone onto her gravel, planters to the side of her gate, the kind of mundane relocation that felt weirdly rebellious. I got back in and parked. By the time I'd taken the handbrake off she was outside with her phone, filming my number plate like she was on a wildlife program. You've damaged my property, she said, meaning the planters, which were unharmed and just not in the middle of the road. I pointed to the cone and said as evenly as I could manage that you can't put items in the highway to reserve spaces. It's outside my wall, she said again, like a spell. I left it at that and went inside. Half an hour later a white van with highways on the side rolled up. I hadn't called them. I can only assume someone doing the school run or one of the delivery drivers did, because the planters were back out again by then and even prams were having to step out into the road to get round. The officer took a photo, knocked on their door, and you could hear his voice in that peculiarly cheerful counsel tone that means paperwork is about to arrive. He handed her a notice, asked her to remove the obstructions, and when she refused, they're decorative, he said they'd be removed for her. He and his colleague carried both planters to her driveway while she filmed them too. He looked over to me, saw the drip tray of our porch, and gave the tiniest shrug of sympathy, the kind you feel more than see. All this would have made for a daft enough day, but the nursery thing was the match to dry tinder. Mid-afternoon the intercom went again. I didn't buzz her in, she stayed at the gate and raised her voice so the entire street could hear anyway. How dare you go to my work, that's defamation. I told her I'd contacted the manager with a safeguarding concern because of something she said on my doorstep. She shrugged off the word safeguarding like it was confetti. I've done nothing wrong, she said, and then, fatally, I know exactly who your child is. She said our child's name. There was a moment where I actually felt the air change. I don't know how to describe it better than that. I looked up at the camera lens and then back at her and asked, loudly, how she knew that. She blinked and realized what she just said out loud while being recorded. Everyone knows everything in this village, she tried, and then spun away, shouting over her shoulder that we were making enemies. I emailed the nursery manager again immediately and told her what had just happened, including the exact words. She rang me back in 15 minutes flat. She asked if she could come by, and within the hour she was sitting at my kitchen table, hair wet from the walk, professionalism dialed up to 11. I played her the snippet from our intercom and she went very still and said, thank you, and that she was going to escalate it internally right away. She repeated that our child would not be in contact with that staff member at all and that, going forward, all communications about our child would be in writing, not in person, to protect everyone. She couldn't comment on consequence, but I didn't need her to. If there was a theme to the day it was that every petty thing got matched by something official. Our bins, for instance, didn't get collected because the lorry couldn't get down, thanks to the way she then parked astride the curb after the planters were taken away, half on, half off, forcing cars into a slalom. The bin crew knocked on ours to ask whose car it was and when they realized it wasn't, they went to hers. There was this little tableau on the pavement, 2 refused collectors in high vis, the driver out of the cab, all 3 pointing and shaking heads, and then the driver walked back to his cab and spoke into a radio. 2 neighbors peered over hedges. She eventually came out in slippers and moved the car, arms folded the whole walk, and as the lorry finally eased through one of the crew called back, you can't keep doing this, love, in the way only an older man can say love and have it sting. The mundanity of it was grimly satisfying. Around 6, John came over on his own. No filming, no notes in hand, just cap in fingers. He looked wrecked. He asked if we could talk sensibly. He said he hadn't written the first soggy note and he hadn't known she'd been to ours all those times when he wasn't there. He said he was trying to keep a lid on things and that she was under a lot of pressure with work. I told him we were happy to move the car for one-off things, gardening, deliveries, skips, if he told us in advance, exactly as we'd put in the letter with the chocolates. I told him, again, that we were not going to agree never to park under the street lamp and that this wasn't about them personally, it was about safety and practicality. He nodded hard enough to agree with anything and asked if I'd mind telling the nursery we wanted it to blow over. I told him I had nothing to retract and nothing to add. The nursery were following their process. He said he understood. I believed him in that moment. And then, because apparently this story is a matryoshka doll of petty surprises, a letter dropped through our door after 9, no stamp, hand-delivered. It wasn't a note this time. It was from the nursery manager. Printed on headed paper, formal and careful, it said that following a safeguarding concern, the staff member in question had been removed from all duties involving children pending investigation, that our child's file had been locked to designated senior staff only, and that they welcomed any further information if there were additional incidents. I didn't need a translation to know that it meant she wouldn't be in the building in the morning. I folded it up and felt both vindicated and vaguely sick. I put the kettle on because there was nothing else to do. This morning I went out to the car with our little ones singing to themselves in the buggy about yogurt, bracing for whatever new creative arrangement I'd find at the curb. The space was clear. No planters. No cone. No car slid diagonally like a stubborn bishop across a chessboard. Just wet tarmac and a street lamp clicking off as the day hauled itself up. I strapped our kid in and for a second I rested my forehead against the roof and breathed. And then I started the car and in the rear view, I caught sight of her curtain moving. The smallest twitch. Nothing else. We drove away. I don't know if that means it's over. I do know I've got everything saved 3 times over in the nursery letter in a folder by the door, and that, for the first time in 2 weeks, nobody told me where I could put my car. Update 3. The morning started with a laminated miracle. A parking suspension notice had appeared overnight on the lamp post above the spot, done up with cable ties like a Christmas present nobody asked for. Council crest fuzzed by a Lores printer, dates filled in with a fat black marker that bled through the plastic. I stood there with my coffee going cold and breathed in warm toner and rain. I took a photo, emailed Highways with the subject line query suspension, and went back inside to put yogurt in a small mouth and my tongue in my cheek. Highways replied before I'd rinsed the spoon. No suspension was in place. A van buzzing like a wasp showed up within the hour, Two men in high vis and the particular patience of people who take down other people's certainty for a living. They snipped the ties, took a photo for their file, and knocked on John's door. Through our hedging I could hear that cheerful counsel tone again, the one that says there is a form for your feelings, something about unauthorized signage and a section number I wish I'd written down. She marched out with her hands on hips like she could hold the whole street up. "It's outside my wall," she said, and the taller one gestured with a laminated sheet, "All pleasant, it's the public highway, love." He said love and it took any heat in the air and put it out. I would have called it the Days Theater if the parish council hadn't delivered leaflets yesterday about a site meeting regarding parking and visibility at the junction and invited interested parties. Interested parties turned out to be half the street in cagoules and one man from Highways with a measuring wheel and a clipboard that rustled like he was turning over verdicts. He set his wheel off from the corner and clicked to the lamp post, then passed it to their wall. He asked us to talk through movement. We did. She said my frontage and messy and danger and he nodded at each like they were on his list and in the end pointed to the plan clipped under the bulldog clip and talked about sight lines and junction protection. Guidance is vehicles shouldn't park within 10 meters of a junction, he said, but without weighting restrictions it's advisory. There's a case here for lines. Her eyes lit at the word lines and then he drew the imaginary ones with his hand and put them exactly across our frontage and around the bend. To improve visibility. He turned to her and said, very gently, the area under the lamp is outside your property boundary and not within the junction protection distance. We wouldn't be proposing restrictions there. She tried to argue the air into new shape. He showed her where the adopted highway ends on his plan. She didn't have anywhere to put her hands that would make the map different. He did say they could consider an H-bar across their driveway if they applied, but that it was advisory and not enforceable, and that any scheme would go to consultation and take months because of budgets. He wrote consult and J protection and lamp OK in tidy letters. When everyone drifted away like damp confetti, the road felt wider for being underwritten. We went home and found an email from the nursery manager sitting in my inbox like a pebble. She let me know they'd made a lotto referral, she spelled it out, local authority designated officer, and that because of the words said at our gate they were obliged to escalate externally. She was careful, professional, precise. I thanked her and put my phone face down and stared at the wood grain for a long minute because a thing can be both exactly right and absolutely stomach dropping at the same time. At lunch a man with a van turned up for the gates, not the original company, a bloke recommended by the electrician across the way, with a battered transit and a thermos that had stories. He looked at the control board, sucked air like an oral tradition, and then did two things that felt like witchcraft because they were just competence. He disconnected the failing motor cleanly and installed a temporary manual latch that would hold the gates open without the system thinking it was being murdered. Insurance fine if you leave them open, he said. You've got cameras and lights. Just don't wedge with a brick, insurance hates bricks. He laughed like he'd seen a lot of bricks. He'll quote for a full replacement and a new beam next week. For the first time in months the gate stayed politely where they were told without lying about it. Mid-afternoon the universe decided we hadn't had enough day and sent a fire engine to prove a point no one had asked it to prove. Not for us. Up the road an elderly neighbor's telecare pendant went off and the crew came through like a red exclamation mark. The driver eased the appliance round the corner, glanced at our car under the lamp, and made the turn without touching a curb or raising anyone's heart rate. She was out on her step before the engine had fully passed. How can emergency services get through with that car there? She shouted at their exhaust. The second firefighter in the cab looked at our car and then at me and gave a tiny shrug with his eyebrows that said, "Mate." When they came back 5 minutes later he leaned out and called, "You're fine there." It was the most blessed casual sentence I've ever heard in my life. It should have ended on that, but dinner cooled while we opened a new front in the theater. A letter with a heavy font through our door from a firm of solicitors I'd never heard of, telling us to cease and desist, defamation and threatening costs. The letterhead had a crest that looked like clip art wearing a tie. It listed an SRA number that Google thought belonged to a different firm in Manchester that only does conveyancing. I sent a screenshot to the email on the letterhead and CC'd the public inquiries email on the real firm's website. The real firm replied inside 20 minutes, they hadn't sent it, they don't act for any such client, and they'd be grateful for a copy of the original for their records. I printed their email and stapled it to the fake. I don't know why that made me laugh, but it did, right until the moment I pictured her at a kitchen table feeding angry words into a template and became tired right down to the bone. Just after 7 there was another visitor in a high-vis, the same highways officer from the morning, rain on his eyelashes, a notice in his hand. He stuck it to their gatepost at eye level, that cheerful tone dialed to script. He read it aloud because she'd come out and demanded to know what it said. It was about unauthorized signage and potential fines. She told him to take it down. He told her that taking it down would be an offense and that it would come down when compliance came up. He nodded at me very slightly like we were in on the world's least exciting magic trick and left. When it finally went quiet, I took our kids' bath toys off the kitchen table and put the nursery letter and the real solicitor email, and the highways incident number on top of the folder on the sideboard. I don't know if I believe in talismans, but that stack is what I've got. Last thing, when I went to bring the car round to nose it into the now open gates, I stopped under the lamp and just sat for a minute with the engine idling and the dashboard ticking tiny clicks. The space felt different without the cone, without the pot plants, without the glow of someone's phone filming. Her curtains did their little twitch, nothing else. I turned off the ignition, rolled the window down, and listened to the rain start small and then decide what it wanted to be. Then I turned the key again and tucked the car up on the drive because, for once, the thing that made the most sense was the thing the hardware finally let me do. Update 4. The day started with the council green envelope rubber banded to our gate like it had been delivered by a particularly conscientious pigeon. Inside was a note from the Safer Neighborhood team about informal mediation regarding a neighbor dispute, venue the village hall, chairs provided, biscuits promised. A name I recognized from the PCSO's jacket was typed at the bottom in a font that had big spreadsheet energy. It wasn't a summons, but it wore the shape of one. I put it on the sideboard with the folder because that's where officialdom goes to be calmed. By 10 a cherry picker had shouldered up to the lamp. 2 men in high-vis and harnesses did that comfortable bicker you only get when people have split a bacon sarnie forever. The old sodium bulb came down like a tiny dead sun and a new LED went in, white, brisk, efficient. The light snapped on and the road looked like it had its teeth cleaned. The taller one yelled down to the other, visibility complaint, junction, and the other yelled back, tick. I stood by the hedge with a mug and said, thank you to nobody in particular. She came out and said it was like a prison yard. The man in the bucket flipped his visor and said, less likely to trip on your way to the car, love, and cranked down with the insouciant authority of a man who has a harness and an answer to every question. If there's a soundtrack to our life now, it's beeping, reversing lorries, intercoms, forms loading. At lunch I got a call from a calm woman who introduced herself as the lotto for the county. She asked if I had 10 minutes for a statement and then took 45 because 10 minutes is imaginary. She was methodical in a way that takes all the drama out of everything and replaces it with words like sequence and allegation and recording. I played her the intercom clip. She asked me to send the raw file and to keep a copy separate to the main folder as belt and braces, which made something in me unclench because it sounded like someone had their belt and braces on for us. She said she'd liaise with the nursery and that we might not hear much for a while because processes move at the speed of process, but that we'd logged what mattered. I thanked her and then sat looking at the phone, which has become a little square full of consequences. John popped his head round the gate as the lotto call clicked off. He had that cap off look that means the sentence starts with I'm sorry even if it doesn't. Skip coming in half an hour, he said. We've got a roofer tomorrow and it's the only time they can drop it. Would you mind? He didn't finish because he didn't have to. I said I'd move the car and he looked relieved like he'd been holding his breath since 8. When the Skip lorry turned up it rattled the china in the dresser like a small earthquake. The driver had the permanent squint of a man who can put 15 tons anywhere you ask and enjoys proving it. She tried to direct him, arms like semaphore for no in every language. He looked at her and then at me and then at John and said, who's Skip? John said, mine. The driver smiled a small, sharp smile and put the Skip exactly where John pointed, which was half a foot from their front wall and nowhere near the lamp post. It was a glorious moment of geometry. She huffed off and the driver, who had a rosary of biros tucked into his high-vis like metals, said to me, avoid bricks, and laughed, like he'd been told an insurance joke once that had got funnier every year. The post arrived mid-skip. Brown envelope with a window and a real crest this time, the sort of embossed bird that means the paper it's on takes itself seriously. Inside, a letter from the real firm whose name had been on the pretend solicitor's letter, on weighty stock, stating for the avoidance of doubt that they had not sent the correspondence we'd received and that they had written to the individual using their name, demanding that they desist. They used words like infringement and misrepresentation and the sizzle-free threat of we reserve our position. It was the quietest, most expensive sounding telling off I've ever seen. 5 minutes later I watched her through the camera take hold of a letter with the same crest and have a very animated conversation with nobody in particular on her drive. The paper flapped with her words like it wanted away. Around 3 the PCSO from the other night knocked, the familiar tired smile hanging onto his face like Velcro. He had a form and an apology for the form. They were issuing a community protection warning, he said, nothing dramatic, but a recorded request to stop the specific behaviors we'd listed, the notes, the obstructions, the late-night intercom opera. Think of it as a formal please stop, he said, with an or else in the background if we have to come back. He read from a script with my wall substituted by boundary of property because even in script she has to be translated. He delivered the duplicate to her, and though I couldn't make out the words from our hallway, I could tell the moment he said warning because she did the laugh that doesn't reach the eyes and then talked for a very long time about slander while he looked at his pen like it had a more interesting life than either of us. Somewhere in the middle of all this someone from highways plonked a temporary counter on the road, a little black snake of a cable across the tarmac with a yellow box that clicked like a cricket every time a car passed. Volume and speed survey, the man said to nobody, and taped a laminated notice to the post with cable ties that had real council purchase orders behind them. She came out with scissors like she might cut him off his job and he tapped the laminated sheet and said, cutting these would be criminal damage, but very cheerfully, like a choir singing the terms and conditions. He winked as if to show that his cheerfulness was a policy, not a mood. The lamp at night was a different thing entirely. Our front room had gone from cozy to interrogation unless we pulled the curtains. Our toddler thought bedtime was sunrise and staged a coup. I ordered black outliners while a fox treated the new pool of light like a stage and performed a solo sniffing tour of the wheelie bins. At 7:30 I moved the car back onto the drive between the gates because I could, because the latch worked, because I wanted to try on the feeling of normal. The LED washed the gravel in the kind of crisp that makes you want to sweep something you weren't going to sweep 5 minutes ago. No cone. No planters. Nothing but the low hum of a light that had an opinion about Lux. The nursery manager emailed again after bath time, crisp and careful. The lotto had acknowledged receipt. They'd updated their internal record, senior staff access only maintained. Any contact from the staff member would be via HR. She thanked me for the file again in that way that says we are a machine that runs on documentation and you have given us fuel. I replied with a thank you that felt thin compared to the relief it carried. At 9, everyone's favorite drama venue opened its doors, the village hall. The mediator had put chairs in a circle like a support group for people who own kettles. A flip chart stood ready with uncapped pens like a summoning. There were 6 of us, me, my partner, John, her, the PCSO, and the chair of the parish council who looks like a man who has collected minutes for fun since 1983. She arrived with a folder thick enough to chalk a wheel. She had photos of our car from every angle and dates written in the margin like the sort of detective work that gets you a commendation in a book club. The mediator opened with ground rules that were calm and so adult I wanted to laugh. She started with my wall and my frontage and the character of the street, and the mediator gently rearranged everything into the public highway and sightlines and recorded incidents. The PCSO slid the community protection warning across the table to her like a coaster and asked that she read it and sign to acknowledge receipt. She read. She didn't sign. The PCSO wrote declined to sign in a box that existed exactly for that. John talked like a man who has been living in a house with a small storm system and would like to step outside for a day. He said he wanted a way to ask us for one-offs that didn't involve his wife arriving at our door like a bell out of tune. I said exactly what I'd said on our path weeks ago. Tell us in advance and we'll move for the day. Gardening, deliveries, skips, whatever fits the size of your truck. The chair of the parish council said something about a working group for junction safety and wrote the words trial markings on the flip chart and drew a line with his hand in the air like he could paint reality with it. She said defamation 3 times. The mediator said safeguarding once, carefully, as a reminder that there was a separate thing happening in a separate room. You could feel the air change when she heard the word. She said, smaller, I only said a name, and the PCSO's pen wrote that sentence down like it was cold stone. We left with nothing solved in the TV sense, but the strangest sense of the ground being more level than it had been at tea time. Outside, under the new white light, John hung back. She'll be at her sister's for a couple of days, he said, like he was telling us the weather forecast. I pretended not to see the tired in it and told him the skip wasn't in the way and the roofer could bang at 8 if he needed to. Back home I tucked the mediation sheet, headings, dates, the lotto's name, into the folder. The stack is taller now. It has its own gravity. I made 2 mugs of tea, added a biscuit because the hall had promised biscuits and, objectively, failed, and sat by the window where you can almost see the lamp but not quite. I could hear the click of the timer on the little yellow traffic box down the road counting cars that don't know they're being counted. Our child announced yogurt like a politician announces a policy and then fell asleep mid-song, black outliners pegged up with clothes pegs like a very British emergency solution to the brightness of the world. When I took the rubbish out just before bed, the road smelt of wet tarmac and new light. A hedgehog argued very softly with a slug by the curb. The LED made everything look temporary and permanent at the same time. Her curtains didn't twitch. John's skip sat like a punctuation mark under the wall. The gates held where I left them without pretending or trapping anyone. For once, nothing asked me where to put my car. I stood there for a minute and let the fact of it soak in like the rain hadn't yet made up its mind. Then I went inside and closed the door gently because I could.